The air in Baton Rouge was thick that morning, humid, heavy, and hiding secrets. Marcus Carter stood in front of Storage Unit 47 on Riverbend Road, his hands trembling as the rusted door rolled up. The smell hit him first, stale air, and something older, something wrong. Beneath the faded blue tarp sat a silver Chevy Nova, the same car his sister drove the night she disappeared 8 years ago. His breath caught in his throat. She was still inside. The morning had that kind of stillness that only comes before something breaks. Baton Rouge summers never really ended. They just lingered, thick and restless. The air tasted of rust and rain that never fell. Marcus Carter parked his old Ford pickup beside the long row of corrugated metal doors, each one numbered in fading white paint. Riverbend Storage sat on the edge of town, wedged between a junkyard and a half-abandoned railroad line. He'd been here before, at least to this kind of place, hunting for used parts. Something he could fix up and flip for a few extra dollars. But today felt different, though he couldn't say why. The auctioneer's voice still echoed faintly in his head, that quick southern rhythm of numbers and promises. $400 for a mystery behind a rusted lock. Most folks bid for old furniture, tires, or scrap metal. Marcus bid because the shape under the tarp looked familiar in a way he couldn't explain. He slid the key into the padlock, his calloused fingers slick with sweat. The lock gave after a few stubborn turns, the kind of sound that belonged in an empty church. When the metal door groaned upward, the smell of trapped years came out first: dust, gasoline, and the faint sweetness of decay. Sunlight cut through the shadows like thin knives, slicing across the concrete floor until it found what was hidden inside. A blue tarp stiff with dust, draped over something car-sized. Marcus stepped closer, boots echoing off the walls. The tarp sagged in the middle where water must have pooled once. He reached for it, then stopped, his pulse drumming in his ears. He told himself it was just curiosity. Maybe an old engine, maybe junk he could sell. But his body knew better. The tarp peeled back, slow edges catching on rusted chrome. The first thing he saw was a strip of silver metal, a cracked headlight, and the faded emblem of a Chevy Nova. His heart slammed against his ribs. He knew that car. Everyone had told him to let it go, that people disappear, that sometimes they just leave. But that car had vanished with his sister 8 years ago, the same week the police stopped returning his calls. He stepped around to the back, trying not to look but unable to stop himself. The license plate was still there, crooked and dusty, Louisiana 7K292. He didn't even need to wipe it off. He had that number memorized, tattooed somewhere deep inside. His breath left him in a sound that wasn't quite a word. For a long moment he couldn't move. The air seemed to thicken around him, pressing down on his chest. He should call someone, he thought. The police, maybe. But his feet carried him forward anyway. He leaned toward the driver's side window, darkened with age and grime. The glass reflected his face, first older now, worn by years of searching, but behind it, in the dim light, something sat slumped in the seat. His mind refused to make sense of it. He blinked once, twice. Then it came into focus, bones, fragile and quiet, still wearing the tattered remains of a nurse's uniform. Renee's uniform. Marcus stumbled backward, hitting the side of the storage wall. The metal rang out, startling a flock of pigeons from the rafters. He wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in his throat, caught between disbelief and grief. For 8 years he'd driven these roads, knocking on doors, handing out flyers with her smiling face. Every birthday he left a candle burning in her apartment, refusing to admit what everyone else had already accepted. And all this time, she'd been here, locked in a metal box less than 10 miles from home. His hands shook as he pulled the rotary phone from his pocket, the one his shop for emergencies, and dialed a 911. His voice came out broken, unfamiliar. "I found her," he said. "My sister. She's here." The operator's tone was calm, procedural. "Sir, what's your location?" He gave it, words tumbling out too fast. "Please send someone," he added, then repeated it again, because he didn't know what else to do. By the time the first patrol car arrived, the sun had climbed high enough to turn the metal roofs into mirrors. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters. They asked for his name, his ed, his reason for being there. When Marcus tried to explain about the auction, about the tarp in the car, he saw it in their eyes before they said a word, the quiet suspicion reserved for men who looked like him. One officer leaned toward the car window, flashlight cutting through the gloom. "We'll need homicide down here," he said into his radio. The other turned to Marcus. "Sir, I'm gonna need you to step back and keep your hands where I can see them." He did as he was told, though anger burned through the shock. "I called you," he said. "She's my sister." The officer's face didn't change. "Just procedure, sir." But Marcus had lived in Louisiana long enough to know what procedure meant when it came to men with his skin. As more cars arrived, the parking lot filled with the harsh glare of blue lights. Yellow tape stretched across the entrance, sealing away what had already been sealed for 8 long years. Reporters would come later, cameras hungry for tragedy. For now, there was only Marcus and the memory of a promise he'd made the night Renee vanished. "I'll find you, no matter how long it takes." He had kept that promise, but the victory tasted like ashes. While the detectives swarmed the unit, photographing every inch, Marcus stood off to the side, arms wrapped around himself as if to hold in the pieces. The questions came fast. When did you buy it? How did you know it was hers? Why this unit and not another? He answered until the words lost meaning. When they finally let him sit, it was on the curb beside the yellow tape, the sound of cicadas rising like static. A medic offered him water. He didn't take it. He thought of the day Renee disappeared, October 3, 1987. She'd finished the night shift at say. Mary's texted no, called, because back then they still used phones that rang to say she was heading home. She was tired, she said, but she'd see him for breakfast. She never made it. That morning he drove the road himself, mile by mile, scanning ditches and parking lots. The police told him to wait 24 hours. Then 48. Then they stopped taking his calls. The city moved on, but Marcus never did. Now, watching the detectives pull her car out of the darkness, he realized what the waiting had cost him. The years had carved new lines into his face, stolen color from his hair, hardened something inside him that might never soften again. Still, he felt a kind of grim relief. He had found her. The world had kept its secret long enough. When they asked him to come down to the station for a statement, he didn't argue. He knew how this would go. They'd treat him like a suspect first, a brother second. But he also knew something they didn't. True truth has a way of surviving, even when buried under 8 years of dust and lies. As the squad car pulled away from Riverbend Road, Marcus looked back through the window. The storage unit stood open now, gaping like a wound. The tarp fluttered in the wind, trying to cover what could never be hidden again. The police station smelled like old coffee and cigarette smoke, the kind that never really leaves the walls. Marcus sat in a metal chair that rocked every time he shifted his weight. The hum of fluorescent lights above him mixed with the faint murmur of typewriters, somewhere down the hall. His hands rested on the table, knuckles scarred, and still trembling from the morning. Across from him sat Detective Raymond Hicks, a white man in his 50s with a gut that pressed against his badge and a look that said he'd seen too much and trusted no one. He flipped through a notepad slowly, the way a man flips through someone's life. "Mr. Carter," Hicks began, his tone measured, polite in that southern way that could turn sharp without warning. "You say you bought that storage unit this morning at an auction, correct?" Marcus nodded. "And you had no idea what was inside?" "No, sir. I was just looking for parts." "Parts?" Hicks repeated, jotting something down. "For what? Cars?" "I'm a mechanic." "Uh-huh. You've done storage auctions before?" "A few times, never anything like this." Hicks leaned back in his chair. "So let me get this straight. You happen to buy the one unit in the whole damn city that's been locked up for 7 years, and inside is your sister's car. The same one she disappeared in. That's a hell of a coincidence." Marcus clenched his jaw. "I didn't plan it. I didn't even know the place existed until this morning." "You expect me to believe that?" Hicks asked, eyes narrowing. Marcus met his gaze. You can believe what you want. I found her. That's the truth. Hicks scribbled another note. Maybe you found her because you put her there. The words landed like a slap. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and steady. You think I killed my sister? You think I kept paying rent on some damn storage unit for 8 years just to stage a scene? Hicks didn't answer right away. He tapped his pen against the table. It's not my job to think, Mr. Carter. It's my job to ask questions. And right now, everything about this looks bad for you. They kept him there for 4 hours, repeating the same questions in slightly different ways. Every time Marcus told the story, the details sounded less real to his own ears. The Facebook ad, no, there was no Facebook back then. It had been a flyer at the auto shop. The auctioneer, the tarp, the car. He could see it all again when he closed his eyes. At one point, another detective, a younger black woman named Officer Lynna Brooks, stepped in. She offered him a cup of coffee and a gentler tone. I'm sorry about your sister, she said quietly when Hicks left the room. I read about her back in '87. You never stopped looking, did you? Marcus shook his head. How could I? I know, she said. I just sometimes folks in this department forget what it means to lose somebody. When they finally let him go, the sun was low over the Mississippi River, turning the sky a bruised orange. Reporters were already outside the precinct, shouting questions, cameras flashing. Someone must have leaked his name. Marcus, did you kill your sister? One man yelled. Why were you at the storage unit? Another asked. Marcus pushed past them without a word, the sound of shutters clicking behind him like gunfire. Back at his apartment on Perkins Street, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends, co-workers, people from church, some offering condolences, others asking questions they didn't have the right to ask. He unplugged the phone and sat by the window, staring out at the city that had forgotten her. Baton Rouge looked different now, colder somehow. For 8 years, this was the city he searched, street by street, poster by poster. Now it was the place where they thought he was a killer. The memories came in pieces, like a slideshow he couldn't turn off. The first flyer, he'd printed her picture smiling in her nurse's scrubs, the word missing in bold black letters. He'd driven from Jackson Square to Shreveport with a box of those flyers in the passenger seat. He'd called radio stations, begged local news anchors to mention her name. Some did, most didn't. The police stopped calling after the first month. They said there were no leads, no sightings, nothing to go on. They always said the same thing about girls like Renee. Maybe she ran away, maybe she wanted a new start. Marcus knew better. His sister wasn't the kind to vanish. She called him every day after their mama died. She left notes on his fridge when she borrowed his car. She didn't just disappear. He'd spent the first 2 years chasing every rumor. A nurse in Lafayette thought she saw Renee at a gas station. A woman in Monroe claimed she recognized her in a motel lobby. Marcus drove 6 hours each time, hope burning and dying all over again. After a while, even hope started to feel like cruelty. The only thing that never changed was the guilt, that quiet voice that whispered maybe he could. They picked her up that night. Maybe he could. V followed her home. Maybe he should. V noticed the man staring at her too long in the hospital parking lot. He poured himself a drink, cheap bourbon from the corner store, and let it burn its way down. The apartment was too quiet. Renee's picture sat on the mantel, next to their mother's rosary. She'd been so full of life, always humming when she cooked, always carrying extra snacks for the neighborhood kids. Marcus remembered the last thing she'd said before heading to work that final night. Don't wait up. I'll see you for breakfast. He'd made her favorite grits and eggs the next morning anyway, just in case. The plate had gone cold before he realized she wasn't coming home. The years that followed blurred together. His shop nearly went under because he spent more time searching than fixing cars. His girlfriend left after the 3rd anniversary of Renee's disappearance, said she couldn't compete with a ghost. But he didn't care. Every year he printed new flyers, updated them with an age progression drawing. He paid the rent on her apartment long after he could afford it, kept the lights on even when the electricity bill nearly broke him. It wasn't about logic anymore, it was about faith. Faith was all a black man had in a city that never really cared whether his sister lived or died. When the local paper finally stopped covering the story, he started mailing letters to national networks. He never got a reply. Somewhere around year 5, he stopped expecting one. But he never stopped looking. Now that he'd found her, or what was left of her, the peace he imagined didn't come. Instead, there was a heavier kind of pain, the kind that came from knowing the truth too late. And beneath that pain was something else, a quiet, rising anger that refused to fade. Someone had done this to her. Someone had locked her in that box, and walked away like she was nothing. And the same city that ignored her when she was missing would probably ignore that truth too. When he closed his eyes, he saw the tarp again, saw the shimmer of sunlight across the cracked windshield. He could still smell the dust, the faint sweetness of rot. He dreamed for years of finding her, but he'd never imagined what it would cost. He thought it would bring closure. It didn't. It just reopened everything he tried to bury. By midnight, the phone started ringing again. He almost ignored it until he heard the voice on the machine, soft, female, calm. Mayor Carter, my name is Gloria Watkins. I'm an attorney. I heard about your case. I think I can help you. Marcus didn't know then that her call would change everything, that the woman on the other end would be the only person who truly believed him. For now, he just sat there in the dark, staring at the city lights through the blinds, whispering to the night like he used to whisper to God. I found you, baby girl, he said. I found you. Now I'm gonna find the man who took you. Gloria Watkins showed up the next morning, right as the sun was bleeding through the blinds of Marcus's small apartment. She wore a beige suit that looked pressed to perfection, carried a leather briefcase, and had the kind of calm energy that made people stop talking when she entered a room. She was in her early 40s, sharp, with a quiet confidence born from years of fighting the kind of battles most lawyers avoided. Mazar Carter, she said, offering her hand. Call me Gloria. I'm sorry we have to meet like this. Marcus, still running on no sleep, nodded. You said on the phone you could help. She gave him a small, steady smile. If you want the truth, yes. But if you want peace, I can't promise that. They sat at the kitchen table, papers spread between coffee mugs and an ashtray filled with the ghosts of old habits. Gloria opened her briefcase and pulled out a notepad. Tell me everything, she said. And Marcus did, from the night Renee disappeared to the morning he found her car. She didn't interrupt once, only taking notes in her tight, deliberate handwriting. When he finished, she leaned back and exhaled. You've been living with this for 8 years. You've done more work than most detectives I know. The system failed you, Mr. Carter. That's not news. But maybe, just maybe, we can make it work for you this time. Her plan was simple. On paper traced the paper trail. Someone rented that unit under your sister's name. Someone forged her signature. If we find who that was, we find who killed her. She drove them both to the Riverbend storage office later that afternoon, a squat concrete building that smelled like mildew and oil. The manager, a middle-aged man with a bald head and a nervous smile, looked surprised to see them. We already talked to the police, he said. Gloria flashed her card. Good. Now you can talk to us. The man is named Tagrida. Millen hesitated, glancing at Marcus before speaking. You're the brother, right? Look, I'm real sorry about what happened to your sister. I didn't know anything was in there. I swear. Gloria's voice softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. I'm sure you didn't, but I need access to the rental records for Unit 47. The original lease, payment logs, anything with signatures. Millen shifted uncomfortably. I can't release that without permission from the owner. Then get him on the phone, she said. The owner, Harold Whitmore, was one of those names that carried weight in Baton Rouge. He owned several properties, a few car lots, and was rumored to have friends in high places, the kind of man whose golf game was more powerful than most people's testimony. When Millen called, Harold's voice came through the receiver loud enough for Marcus to tell whoever's asking that all records are confidential. If the police want them, they can get a warrant. Gloria smiled thinly. "Thank you for clarifying," she said, and hung up. Outside, she turned to Marcus. "That man just told me exactly what I needed to hear." He frowned. "He told you no." "Exactly. People who have nothing to hide don't slam doors that fast." Over the next week, Gloria worked like a storm. She filed formal requests under Louisiana's property disclosure laws, and when those were denied, she went to a judge. Marcus accompanied her to court, sitting quietly while she argued her case with the precision of a surgeon. "A young woman's body was found in that unit," she told the judge. "If the owner's business records are clean, he has nothing to fear. But if they aren't, Your Honor, then there's a killer hiding behind corporate paperwork." The judge, a wary black man with graying temples, studied her for a long moment before signing the order. "You have 48 hours, he said. "Make it count." By the end of that week, they had the files, a stack of faded papers held together with a rusted metal clip. Gloria spread them across her desk, methodically examining each one. The lease for Unit 47 was dated October 6, 1987, 3 days after Renee vanished. The name listed was Renee Carter. The signature, though, was wrong. "Your sister didn't write this," Gloria said quietly. "Look at the loop on the R, it's too wide." Renee's handwriting was tighter, right? Marcus nodded. "She wrote everything small, like she was afraid to take up space." The payment records were stranger still. After the first month, no check payments, no credit transactions, just cash. $50, sometimes $60, always paid in person. The handwriting in the logbook changed over the years, different clerks, different initials, but the signature authorizing the payment always read HUD, Harold Whitmore himself. Gloria flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing. Something's off. This unit should be gone up for auction 90 days after default. But it didn't. It sat unpaid for 7 years. Someone kept it off the list. She turned to another sheet, an internal memo marked "Private, do not auction." The code beside it matched Unit 47. "There," she said, tapping the page. "That's how it stayed hidden. They flagged it in the system. Probably told the clerks to ignore it." Marcus felt his stomach twist. Why would he do that? Why keep it hidden all this time? Gloria met his eyes. Because he knew what was in it. A day later, they visited Harold's office downtown. The building was old brick with marble floors, the kind of place where secrets were polished until they shined. Harold greeted them with a politician's smile. "Ms. Watkins, Mr. Carter, I've already spoken to the authorities. I have nothing more to add." Gloria didn't sit. "You had one of your storage units marked as private for 7 years, during which time a murdered woman's car sat inside. You personally approved cash payments every month. You expect me to believe you didn't notice?" His smile flickered. "My son handled most of the nightly business. I'm semi-retired." "Your son," Gloria repeated. "Evan Whitmore, correct?" "That's right. He ever worked security at St. Mary's Hospital." The pause was too long. "Maybe for a short time." "Why?" Gloria leaned forward, voice low. "Because that's where Renee Carter worked before she disappeared." Harold's eyes hardened. "I think we're done here." He stood, signaling to his assistant. "I'll have my attorney contact you." Gloria didn't move. "Do that," she said, her tone calm but cutting. "And make sure he brings copies of every cash transaction tied to that unit. Because if you can't explain why your son was paying rent on a dead woman's storage space, I'll have the district attorney explain it for you." Back in the car, Marcus stared out the window, the city rolling by in a blur of light and noise. "You think the son did it?" he said. Gloria nodded once. "I think he was obsessed with your sister. I think she rejected him, and I think he snapped. The father covered up to protect his family name." Marcus's throat tightened. "You sound sure." "I'm sure of one thing," she said. "The truth leaves footprints, even when people try to sweep them away." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Evan Whitmore's name written beside the payment logs, imagining his face smug, untouchable. Born into the kind of privilege that could bury a body and call it a mistake. He wondered how many times Evan had passed Renee in the hospital hallway, smiling like a man who thought the world owed him something. He wondered if she'd been scared that night, whether she'd known it was him before the end. When morning came, Gloria called. "I got confirmation," she said. Evan Whitmore worked the night shift as Mary's on October 3rd, 1987, the night your sister disappeared. He quit 3 days later. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Marcus spoke, his voice rough but steady. "Then that's where we start." The news broke before the police could even decide what to do with it. Someone at the courthouse must have leaked the court order. And by the next morning the local paper ran a front-page story, storage unit records link prominent businessman to missing woman case. Marcus woke to the sound of reporters shouting outside his apartment window. He didn't open the blinds. He didn't need to see the headlines to know whose name was being dragged through the mud again. Only this time, it wasn't his. It was the Whitmores. Gloria arrived with coffee and a stack of folders that looked heavier than the law itself. "We don't have time to hide," she said, placing the cup in front of him. "They're already building a defense, and the police are dragging their feet." But the DA agreed to reopen the file. They were calling it a re-examination, which is bureaucratic talk for we were scared of being sued later. She gave a small, tired smile. "It's a start." At the precinct, Detective Hicks looked less confident than he had the week before. He'd seen the headlines too. The department couldn't ignore it now, the whole city was watching. Hicks lit a cigarette, even though the sign above his desk said no smoking. "So you were telling me," he said to Gloria, "that Harold Whitmore's son Evan was working at SAT. Mary's when Renee disappeared, quit right after, and then helped his daddy hide the car. That's a hell of a story." Gloria folded her arms. "It's not a story. It's evidence. And if you'd done your job in 1987, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Hicks blew out smoke, eyes narrowing. "Careful, counselor. You don't want to start making enemies in this building." "You already made one," she said evenly, "when you accused an innocent man of murder." Hicks turned to Marcus. "You sure you want to keep stirring this up, son? Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie." Marcus's voice was low but unshakable. "My sister isn't a dog, detective. She's a person. And I'm not letting her kill her sleep." The room went silent for a beat before Hicks stubbed out his cigarette. "Fine, we'll bring the boy in." Evan Whitmore was 35 now, living in a 2-story house outside Lafayette. He traded the security guard uniform for a suit, and the quiet life of a man who thought the past couldn't touch him. When Hicks and 2 state officers knocked on his door, he greeted them with a smirk. "This about the storage business. I already talked to my lawyer. This ain't civil, son," Hicks said. "This is homicide." That wiped the smile from his face. The interrogation room felt smaller than Marcus remembered. He wasn't allowed inside for the questioning, but Gloria had secured permission to observe from the viewing window. Evan sat across from Hicks, arms folded, a cheap gold watch gleaming on his wrist. Hicks asked the basics first: where he worked, who he knew, what he remembered from 1987. Evan answered with the smoothness of a man who'd rehearsed. "I worked nights at St. Mary's, same as dozens of others. I barely knew that girl." Hicks slid a photo across the table. "Renee, smiling in her nurse's scrubs. You asked her out, didn't you?" "Maybe once," Evan said with a shrug. "No crime in that." "You asked 5 times, Hicks said. "That's what her coworkers said." Evan's jaw tightened. "I don't remember that." Gloria leaned toward the glass, her voice low. "Watch his eyes," she whispered to Marcus. "He's lying. People look down when they lie." "He's remembering." Hicks pressed on. "You quit 3 days after she disappeared. Why?" "Personal reasons. You rot RC parking lot in your work calendar that night." "What does that mean?" Evan's face drained of color. "I don't know what that is." "Renee Carter. Parking lot," Hicks said slowly. "You were waiting for her, weren't you?" Evan's mouth opened, then closed again. "I want my lawyer." That ended the session, but it didn't end the fight. The police couldn't hold him. They said they needed physical evidence, DNA, fingerprints, anything concrete. 8 years was too long. The car had been cleaned, time had erased what truth once left behind. The DA's office stalled. They called the case under review. Marcus knew what that meant. They were waiting for it to blow over. But Gloria wasn't built to wait. She filed motions, requests, subpoenas, anything to keep the fire burning. The Whitmores hired one of the most expensive firms in New Orleans. A white-haired attorney named Richard Shaw, who specialized in burying scandals before they could breathe. He held a press conference 2 days later, standing on the courthouse steps. "This tragedy has gone on long enough," he told reporters. The Whitmore family had no involvement in Miss Carter's unfortunate death. Any suggestion otherwise is defamatory and politically motivated. The cameras flashed like fireworks. Marcus watched it from his living room, fists clenched. That night, Gloria called again. "You should see this," she said. Channel 8 just ran a story on the Whitmores' donations to the Baton Rouge Police Foundation, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. No wonder the department dragged its feet. Marcus didn't say anything for a while. When he did, his voice was quiet but full of steel. "They bought silence. That's all it is." The days blurred together after that. Reporters kept calling, some kind, others hungry for a headline. Old friends reached out, people who'd once crossed the street to avoid him. "We always knew you didn't do it," they said. Marcus just nodded. Forgiveness wasn't something he could hand out anymore. One evening, he and Gloria met at the cemetery where Renee's temporary marker stood, a simple wooden cross with her name burned into it. The sun was setting behind the live oaks, their branches heavy with moss. "You think we'll ever see justice?" he asked. Gloria knelt, brushing leaves from the ground. "Justice doesn't always look like handcuffs," she said. "Sometimes it's a verdict. Sometimes it's truth that can't be buried anymore." She looked up at him. "But yes, we will get there." The following week, the case took an unexpected turn. A retired clerk from Riverbend Storage contacted Gloria after seeing her name in the newspaper. Her name was Mabel Dunley, a small, wary woman with eyes sharper than any judge's. "I worked the night shift from 87 to 91, she told them, sipping sweet tea on her porch. "That boy even, he'd come in after hours sometimes. Said his daddy needed him to make payments. Always cash. Never receipts." Gloria asked if she remembered which unit. Mabel nodded. "Number 47. He'd always say, 'Keep this one off the books.' I didn't ask questions back then." "You didn't, if you wanted to keep your job." Gloria's pen froze mid-note. "Would you be willing to testify to that?" Mabel looked out toward the bayou, her voice soft but steady. "For that girl's brother. Yeah. I think it's time someone told the truth." When Gloria called the DA with the new witness, she could hear the shift in tone immediately. "That changes things," the prosecutor said. "If the payments were off record, and we can tie them to even, we might finally have grounds for a civil suit." "Criminal charges are still thin, but civil's fine," Gloria interrupted. "We'll take whatever path gives this family their voice back." That night, Marcus drove by Riverbend Road one last time. The storage unit was empty now, the door replaced, the number repainted. But he could still feel her there. The echo of her laughter, the hum of her old radio when she cooked breakfast. The moon hung low and heavy, casting long shadows across the gravel. He stood there for a long while, hands in his pockets, listening to the hum of the highway. Somewhere out there, the Whitmores were sleeping in silk sheets, untouched by the weight of what they'd done. But for the first time in years, Marcus didn't feel powerless. The truth had started to move, slow and steady, like the river itself, unstoppable once it began to flow. He turned toward his truck, the night air thick with promise and pain. There was still a long road ahead, courtrooms, lawyers, headlines, but for the first time, he could see the outline of justice on the horizon. It wasn't Brierson, not yet, but it was there, flickering faintly, waiting to be claimed. By the time winter crept into Baton Rouge, the air had changed. It wasn't just the weather. It was the way people looked at Marcus now, some with pity, others with shame. For years, they'd whispered that he was the brother who couldn't let go, the man obsessed with ghosts. Now the same people stopped him in grocery stores to say they were so sorry for the misunderstanding. He'd nod politely, thank them, and move on. He didn't need their apologies. The only thing he wanted was accountability. The police had done what police always did when things got messy. They handed it off to the courts. The dad refused to press murder charges, calling the evidence circumstantial. That word burned in Marcus's chest every time he heard it, circumstantial. As if 8 years of cover-ups and cash payments were just coincidences. Gloria didn't seem surprised. That's how they protect their own, she told him. But we were not done. Not by a long shot. She filed the civil suit that December. Marcus, Carter, Vess, Harold, and even Whitmore. The claim: wrongful death, fraudulent concealment, and emotional distress. The number she wrote on the complaint, $20 million, wasn't about money. It was about making the world say Renee's name again. This time in a courtroom where lies had to be spoken under oath. The Whitmore's response came fast. Their attorneys called the case a baseless attempt to profit from tragedy. They accused Marcus and Gloria of exploiting public sympathy. On television, their lawyer Richard Shaw delivered his words with the slick confidence of a man used to winning. "My clients have nothing to hide," he told the cameras. They were victims of circumstance, a father and son being punished for their success. Marcus watched that interview from Gloria's office. Her reaction was calm but fierce. "Good," she said, tapping the screen. "Let him talk. The more he speaks, the more rope he gives us." She slid a stack of deposition notices across the table. "They'll have to answer for every dollar, every lie, every damn signature." The following months were an education in how slow justice could move. Depositions were scheduled, postponed, rescheduled. Documents disappeared only to reappear misfiled. Harold Whitmore's lawyers fought every request for evidence like their lives depended on it. Maybe they did. "They were trying to exhaust us," Gloria said one night, leaning over a desk littered with legal pads and coffee cups. "They think you will give up if it takes long enough." Marcus met her eyes. "I spent 8 years not giving up. They picked the wrong man." When the depositions finally began, Marcus sat quietly in the corner, watching the men who destroyed his family squirm under questions. Even arrived first, dressed in a crisp navy suit, his blonde hair combed perfectly, his smile faint but practiced. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, then spent the next 2 hours pretending not to remember anything. Gloria's voice stayed even, almost gentle, as she guided him through the questions. "Mr. Whitmore, did you know Renee Carter? We worked at the same hospital. Did you ever ask her out?" "I might have once or twice. Witnesses say 5 times. They were mistaken. You quit 3 days after she disappeared. Why?" "Personal reasons." "What kind of personal reasons?" "I don't recall." Each denial chipped away at the calm mask he tried to wear. When Gloria slid the photo of his old work calendar across the table, the one with RC parking lot scrawled in black ink, his confidence faltered. "Do you recognize this?" she asked. "No. That's your handwriting, isn't it?" "I can't say." "You can't say or you won't." His lawyer interrupted, objecting to the tone, to the implication, to the existence of gravity itself. Even looked like a boy hiding behind his father's money, and for the first time, Marcus saw fear in his eyes. Harold's deposition came 2 weeks later. He was colder, smoother, a man who'd spent decades convincing people his word was gospel. "Ms. R. Whitmore," Gloria began, "you own the Riverbend storage facility, correct? Among other properties, yes. Unit 47 was flagged in your internal system as do not auction for over 7 years. Why?" "I'm not involved in day-to-day operations. But you authorized cash payments on that same unit." "I authorize hundreds of payments. I don't memorize each one." "You expect us to believe you never wondered why you were paying rent on a unit leased under a dead woman's name?" He smiled thinly. "I wasn't aware of the tenant's identity." Gloria leaned forward, her tone cutting through the air. "You were aware enough to keep it hidden." After the deposition, they left the courthouse into a storm of flashbulbs. Reporters shouted questions. "Did you kill her? Are you guilty? Do you have anything to say to the Carter family?" Harold didn't flinch. He adjusted his cufflinks, stepped into a black Mercedes, and drove away without a word. The headlines exploded after that. Every newspaper, every late-night talk show, every radio station was talking about it. Wealthy family tied to cold case murder. Some framed it as a tragedy, others as a scandal. Gloria warned Marcus to stay quiet, but the reporters didn't care. They showed up at his job, his apartment, even the church where Renee's funeral had been held. One evening, when a cameraman followed him into the parking lot, Marcus finally snapped. "You want a quote?" he shouted. "Here's your quote. My sister was 24 years old. She wanted to help people, and two men decided her life wasn't worth as much as their reputation." You tell that story. The footage aired that night. The city rallied behind him. For every supporter, though there were still those who called him bitter, said he was chasing money, said he was making trouble. The old prejudice ran deep. A black man daring to drag a white family into court in the South still drew the kind of whispers that made his skin crawl. Marcus heard them and kept walking. Truth didn't need permission to be spoken. By spring, the courthouse had set a date for trial. April 7, 1996. The same week Renee would have turned 33. Gloria told him it was poetic. Marcus thought it was cruelly fitting. He spent the nights leading up to it alone in his apartment, sorting through photos of his sister, trying to pick one for the courtroom exhibit. He finally chose the one of her at her nursing graduation, her smile wide, her cap tilted just slightly to the side. "That's how I want them to see her," he said. "Not what's left of her, who she was." The week before trial, the Whitmores made a settlement offer. $500,000 and a statement of regret for the family's loss. Marcus laughed when Gloria told him. "They think they can buy peace," he said. Gloria nodded. "They were afraid." She slid the document back into its envelope. "We were going to court." On the morning of jury selection, the air in the courthouse was thick with anticipation. Reporters lined the steps, sketch artists set up in the hallway. Marcus wore his only suit, a dark gray one that used to belong to his father. When he walked through those doors, people turned to look, not with suspicion this time, but with respect. He wasn't the man accused anymore. He was the man demanding answers. Inside the courtroom, Harold sat stiff beside his son, both dressed like men attending a business luncheon instead of a reckoning. Their lawyers whispered constantly, passing notes back and forth. Gloria stood at the plaintiff's table, her expression unreadable but her presence commanding. Marcus felt a strange calm settle over him. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was something close. After all these years, the story that everyone wanted to bury was finally going to be told out loud, under oath, with no place left for lies to hide. As the judge entered and the bailiff called the room to order, Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment and whispered the same words he'd said every night since that morning at Riverbend Road. "I found you, Renee. Now let's finish this." The courthouse smelled of old wood and coffee, of dust that had absorbed too many secrets. The ceiling fans hummed lazily above the rows of benches, doing little to fight the Louisiana heat. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, the air heavy with whispers. The courtroom was packed, reporters in the back row, townspeople pressed shoulder to shoulder, faces leaning forward like they were watching a sermon instead of a trial. On the other side of the room sat the Whitmores, Harold, rigid in his pressed navy suit, and Evan, eyes hidden behind a sheen of arrogance. Their lawyers looked calm, confident, expensive. But Gloria Watkins didn't flinch. She stood tall in a gray skirt suit, her files neatly stacked, her mind sharper than any blade in that room. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The bailiff called for order, and the sound of bodies shifting filled the space. Marcus felt his heart pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of what this day meant. For 8 years he'd carried silence. Now it was finally time for the truth to speak for itself. Gloria opened the trial with a voice steady as stone. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, pacing slowly before them, "this is not just a case about money. It's about truth. It's about a young woman named Renee Carter, a daughter, a sister, a nurse who vanished one night and was left to rot in a locked storage unit less than 10 miles from her home. And it's about the men who made sure her body stayed hidden there for 8 long years." The courtroom was silent except for the faint buzz of the lights. You will hear the defense say this is all coincidence. You will hear them say it's bad record keeping, human error, maybe even fate. But by the end of this trial, You will see it for what it is, a cover-up. A calculated decision by a man of power and his son to bury the truth, to bury Renee Carter, and to let her family suffer in silence. She turned, looking directly at Harold and Evan. They thought no one would ever find her. They thought time would protect them. But time doesn't erase guilt, it only waits for justice. When Gloria sat down, Marcus felt the room's energy shift. Even the jury seemed to lean forward. The defense followed with a speech that dripped with practiced sympathy. Richard Shaw, polished and deliberate, told them his clients were victims too. This is a tragedy, he said smoothly. But tragedy doesn't equal guilt. There's no physical evidence, no witnesses, no confession. Just suspicion and speculation. The Whitmores have been pillars of this community for decades. They don't deserve to be crucified by rumor. His words slid across the room like oil, but Marcus could see the hollowness behind them. The first witnesses were called. Hospital co-workers took the stand, one by one. A nurse named Carla described how Evan used to linger near Renee's station, always offering to walk her to her car. He gave me the creeps, she admitted under oath. He didn't take no for an answer. Another coworker, a young orderly at the time, remembered seeing Evan in the hospital parking lot the night Renee disappeared. He said he was off duty, just waiting for someone, the man said, his eyes flicking nervously toward the defense table. Didn't think much of it until I saw the news. Gloria moved carefully, connecting each testimony like threads in a net. She presented the payment logs from the storage facility, page after page of cash transactions, all made after hours. All marked with the same initials, H. She showed the memo labeled "Do Not Auction" and asked the jury why any legitimate business would sit on an unpaid unit for 7 years. The handwriting expert confirmed the lease signature was forged. Every detail built the shape of the truth, piece by piece. Then came the most powerful witness, Mabel Dunley, the retired night clerk. She took the stand wearing her Sunday best, her thin hands trembling slightly but her voice strong. That boy came by near midnight every month, she said, nodding toward Evan. Said he was paying for his daddy. Always cash. Told me that unit was private, not to list it in the books. I didn't ask questions then, but I remember his face clear as day. The defense objected, tried to rattle her with questions about her memory, her age, her health. Mabel didn't waver. You can call me old, but I know what I saw, she said, staring directly at Evan. And I saw him keeping that secret alive. When Evan finally took the stand, the room felt charged, tense, as if even the walls were holding their breath. His lawyer guided him through a list of soft questions, meant to paint him as polite, misunderstood, unlucky. Evan played along, his voice measured, his tone just humble enough. But then Gloria stood up. Her approach was surgical, no anger, just precision. Mr. Whitmore, she said, holding up his calendar. This is your handwriting, correct? I suppose, he muttered. And this Entriarchia parking lot. What does it mean? I don't know. You don't know, she pressed. You wrote it the same week Renee Carter disappeared. He shifted in his seat. I wrote a lot of things. Gloria moved closer. You worked at Mary's hospital. You quit 3 days after Renee vanished. You made cash payments on a storage unit rented in her name. That's not a coincidence, Mr. Whitmore. That's a pattern. His lawyer objected, shouting about speculation, but the judge overruled him. Gloria's next question sliced clean through the room. Did your father help you hide her? The silence that followed was unbearable. Evan's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. Gloria held his gaze for a long moment, then turned back to the jury. You see, even he can't lie his way out of it. When Harold took the stand the next day, the arrogance was gone. He looked smaller, older. He claimed ignorance, said he didn't know what was inside the unit, that his son handled the finances, that it was all a mistake. But under cross-examination, Gloria trapped him in his own words. You personally signed off on monthly payments, she said, handing him a stack of receipts. You marked that unit "Do Not Auction" for 7 years. Harold's voice cracked for the first time. It was an oversight. A 7-year oversight, Gloria asked, or a 7-year lie? The courtroom murmured. Harold's lawyer objected again, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Even the jury could see the truth behind the trembling hands of the man who once owned half the city. When Marcus took the stand, the air shifted once more. He spoke quietly, without theatrics. "For 8 years, I woke up every day hoping for a phone call that never came," he said. "I drove hundreds of miles, passed out flyers, begged people to look at her picture. All the while, she was right here, hidden in a box that these men paid to keep locked. They could have ended my pain at any time. But they didn't. Because their reputation mattered more than my sister's life." His words were simple, but they filled the room. Even the reporters stopped writing. By the time Gloria gave her closing argument, everyone could feel the shift. She didn't raise her voices, she didn't need to. "Justice," she said, "isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about truth. Sometimes it's about saying a name out loud so the world can't forget it again." She pointed to the empty seat at Marcus's side. "That seat belongs to Renee Carter. She can't speak for herself, so you must speak for her." When the jury left the room to deliberate, Marcus could hardly breathe. Hours passed like days. The hum of the ceiling fans filled the silence. Then finally, the door opened. The jurors filed in, faces solemn. The forewoman stood holding a folded paper. Marcus felt his hands shaking. The judge asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." She unfolded the paper and read aloud, her voice steady and clear. Marcus didn't hear every word, just fragments through the roar of his own heartbeat. "In favor of the plaintiff, wrongful death, fraudulent concealment, $20 million. For the first time in 8 years, he let himself cry. When the verdict was read aloud, the sound inside the courtroom changed. It wasn't applause or gasps. It was a release, a long-held breath finally let go. The tension that had coiled in Marcus's chest for years loosened, and the silence that followed felt sacred. The Whitmores didn't move. Harold stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the judge's bench as though refusing to see the world that had finally turned against him. Even sat beside him, face drained of color, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Marcus didn't look at them. He couldn't. His eyes stayed on Gloria, who sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her expression one of quiet, exhausted triumph. For the first time, she allowed herself to exhale. The reporters were waiting outside the courthouse before the gavel had even fallen. Microphones crowded the steps, flashbulbs slicing through the afternoon haze. When Marcus stepped into the light, the noise hit him all at once, questions, shouts, the low hum of people hungry for reaction. He stood there for a long moment before he spoke, his voice low but steady. "This isn't victory," he said. "It's truth. It's what my sister deserved. She was left in the dark for 8 years, and today the world finally saw her." The cameras clicked like gunfire, freezing him mid-sentence, turning his pain into headlines. Across town, television anchors called it a landmark verdict. Civil rights groups hailed Gloria as a hero. But Marcus didn't feel like celebrating. That night, he drove out to the cemetery where Renee lay, the headlights carving a path through the fog. The grass was damp, the air heavy with the promise of rain. He knelt beside her grave, the granite stone cool beneath his palm. "We did it," he whispered. "They can't hide you anymore." His voice broke, not from sorrow but from the strange, hollow relief that comes when a fight ends and there's no war left to wage. He stayed there until the rain came, falling soft and steady like the forgiveness he still couldn't give himself. In the weeks that followed, the city shifted. People who had once doubted him crossed the street to shake his hand. Strangers mailed letters, some from as far as Chicago and Atlanta, telling him how Renee's story had touched them, how it reminded them of their own lost daughters, sisters, mothers. But Marcus knew the truth. For every letter of sympathy, there were 10 moments of silence for the women who would never have their day in court. "You can't save everyone," Gloria told him one afternoon as they walked out of the courthouse for the last time. "No," he said. "But maybe I can stop another brother from having to do what I did." He meant it. Within a month, he started drafting papers for what would become the Renee Carter Foundation, an organization dedicated to investigating cold cases involving missing black women across the South. Gloria agreed to serve as legal counsel. You will need funding, she warned. You will need patience. Marcus smiled faintly. I've had 8 years of practice. While Marcus built, the Whitmores fell apart. Harold's businesses began collapsing under the weight of public outrage. The banks withdrew their partnerships. His name, once synonymous with money and respect, now drew whispers of scandal. His wife filed for divorce quietly, her lawyer citing irreconcilable humiliation. Even fled Louisiana altogether, moving to Florida, where reporters said he lived under an alias, drinking too much and speaking to no one. When asked for comment, Harold's attorneys filed an appeal, claiming the verdict was biased. But even as the paperwork wound its way through the system, everyone knew the court of public opinion had already decided. For Marcus, the money meant little. When the check arrived months later, he didn't cash it right away. It sat on his kitchen counter, crisp and meaningless. He wasn't interested in punishment. He wanted purpose. So he used it to fund the foundation, to hire investigators, to print posters, to offer rewards for information on other missing women the police had given up on. In the small office he rented downtown, next to a gospel church and a barber shop, he hung Renee's photo on the wall. Underneath, he pinned the words, "Justice is a journey, not an end." At first, the work felt strange. He wasn't used to leading meetings, to managing people, to speaking at community centers about grief and hope. But every time he told Renee's story, every time someone came up to him after and said, "I lost my sister too," he felt the ache in his chest ease just a little. It wasn't healing, not really, but it was something like peace. Still, nights were hardest. Sometimes he'd drive past Riverbend Road without meaning to, headlights sweeping over the rows of rusted doors. Unit 47 was gone now, replaced with a new lock, a new tenant, a new number. But Marcus could still see it, the blue tarp, the dust, the glint of the car's chrome in the sunlight. The ghosts didn't fade. They just learned to live quieter. Gloria visited him often, sometimes bringing homemade gumbo, sometimes bringing bad news from the appeals court. They were dragging it out, she'd say, dropping another stack of papers on his desk. But we'll win again. Truth doesn't disappear just because they don't like how it sounds. Marcus smiled warily. You really think they'll ever see the inside of a jail cell? Gloria took a sip of her coffee before answering. No. But their names will never escape what they did. That's its own kind of prison. Months turned into a year. The foundation grew. Volunteers came from across the state, retired cops, law students, mothers who'd lost daughters and refused to let them vanish quietly. They filled the walls with maps and photos, strings connecting faces, places, timelines. Every time they closed a case, Marcus added another candle to the shelf beside Renee's picture. He never counted them. He just kept lighting. Sometimes, late at night, when the office was empty and the streets outside were quiet, Marcus would play the old cassette Renee had left in his car, a gospel choir recording, scratchy with age. The music filled the room like memory itself, raw and beautiful. He'd close his eyes and let it wash over him. He could almost hear her voice singing along, soft and sure. By the summer of 1997, the Whitmores' appeal was denied. The court upheld the $20 million verdict, reaffirming the findings of wrongful death and concealment. It made the evening news again, but by then, the city had moved on to fresher scandals. Marcus didn't watch the coverage. He didn't need to. He already knew that real justice didn't live on television. It lived in the quiet moments and the sound of a mother's voice when she got the call that her missing child had been found. In the weight that lifted from her words when she said, "Thank you." One Sunday afternoon, nearly a year after the verdict, Marcus visited Renee's grave again. The headstone was polished now, the words carved deep and clear: Nee Carter, 1963-987, beloved sister, daughter, and friend. Found but never forgotten. He sat there for a while, talking to her about the foundation, about the cases they were working on, about Gloria's stubbornness and the new volunteer who couldn't stop misplacing the files. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and violet. Before he left, he placed a single sunflower on her grave, her favorite, and whispered, "You started something, baby girl." You helping people still. Driving home, he passed by the old Riverbend storage lot one last time. The place looks smaller now, stripped of its menace. Just another building in a city full of ghosts. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. For the first time in a decade, he felt no pull to look back. The past had finally been laid to rest. Time has a way of dulling the noise but never the memory. By the early 2000s, Baton Rouge had grown into something unrecognizable, more traffic, more concrete. More people trying to outrun their own histories. But the ghosts stayed. They always did. Marcus Carter still woke before sunrise most mornings, out of habit more than necessity. The rhythm of old grief shaping the hours of his day. He'd brew a pot of coffee in the small kitchen of the Foundation's office. Let the radio hum faint gospel tunes. And read through the files that never seemed to stop arriving. Every week there was another letter. Another plea from some mother or brother whose loved one had disappeared without a trace. Some were decades old, names written in faded ink. Others were fresh, still bleeding with panic. He read every one of them. The Renee Carter Foundation had grown far beyond what he'd imagined that rainy night at her grave. It started with just him and Gloria, then 2 volunteers, then 10. By 2002, they had a staff of 12 investigators, partnerships with legal aid groups, and a reputation for being relentless. Local news stations started calling them the people who find the forgotten. Marcus didn't care for the attention, but he couldn't deny the quiet pride that crept in when they brought someone home, even if it was only to lay them to rest properly. Every new case felt like reopening an old wound. The details changed, different towns, different faces, but the pattern was always the same. A young black woman goes missing. Police call it voluntary. Months pass. Families beg for help and are met with silence. Then the trail goes cold. Marcus had learned to read between the lines of police reports, to sense where truth had been ignored. They write these women off because of who they are, Gloria said one evening, as they went through a pile of files. Her reading glasses perched low on her nose. You see it too, don't you? I've seen it my whole life, he said. They don't say it out loud, but it's there who they think matters and who they think don't. Gloria had become something of a legend herself. She spoke at universities, testified before committees, and never once let the spotlight distract her from the work. She and Marcus shared an unspoken bond, not romance, but something deeper, forged in the same fire of loss and fight. She was the strategist. He was the heart. Together, they made the Foundation into more than an office. It was a movement. Still, Marcus couldn't escape the personal shadow of Renee's story. Every time a new case crossed his desk, he saw his sister's face behind it. Some nights, he'd stay late, the building quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights. He'd sit at his desk, open the drawer where he kept her old nursing badge, and trace her name with his thumb. It wasn't sadness anymore, not exactly. It was something heavier but calmer, the weight of a love that had nowhere else to go. One summer afternoon, nearly a decade after the verdict, a young reporter named Lila Hernandez came to interview him. She was bright-eyed, maybe 25, too earnest for the cynicism that journalism often required. Carter, she said, setting her recorder on the desk, what does justice mean to you now? After all this time? Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring out the window where the sun painted the street gold. Justice, he repeated, rolling the word around like a stone in his mouth. Justice means I can look a mother in the eyes and tell her she ain't crazy for wanting answers. It means somebody's name gets said again after the world stopped saying it, that's all. Leela nodded, her eyes soft. Do you think Renee would be proud? He smiled faintly. She was proud of me when I was changing brake pads in my mama's driveway. She'd be proud now. But I'd trade it all if it meant she got to live her life instead. The interview went viral, as much as anything could in those days before social media ruled the world. It brought new donations, new cases, new families. The work grew, and with it, so did the burden. Marcus started losing sleep again, haunted by names he couldn't save. Gloria noticed. You burning out, she told him one evening after a long day. You've got to step back sometimes. He shook his head. I can't. These people don't get to step back. Neither can I, she sighed. You can't carry them all, Marcus. Maybe not, he said. But I can carry one more. That fall, he traveled to Mississippi for a case involving a missing teenager named Desiree Franklin. Her mother, a church choir singer, had written to the foundation begging for help after local police dismissed it as a runaway situation. The case mirrored Renee's in chilling ways the last phone call. The same kind of car, the same indifference from authorities. Marcus and the team spent 3 weeks combing through records, questioning witnesses, and eventually found Desiree's car hidden deep in the woods outside of town. She was gone, but they brought her home. At the funeral, Desiree's mother clutched Marcus's hands and whispered through tears, God sent you to us. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded, his throat too tight for words. It was moments like that reminded him why he kept going. Not for redemption, not even for justice, but for the chance to give someone what he never had an answer. By 2005, the foundation's work caught the attention of national networks. They invited Marcus to Washington to speak about systemic neglect in missing persons cases. He stood behind a podium under bright lights, cameras watching, senators nodding politely as he spoke. We talk about justice like it's a promise, he said, his voice steady. But for people like my sister, it's a privilege. We can't fix the past, but we can stop pretending it's not broken. The crowd applauded. Later, reporters called him a symbol of perseverance. He didn't feel like one. He felt like a mechanic who got dragged into a storm and just refused to drown. The Whitmores, meanwhile, had vanished into obscurity. Harold's health declined after the appeal failed. He sold his remaining properties and moved into a gated community near Biloxi, where neighbors said he rarely left his house. Evan's name resurfaced briefly when a Florida paper ran a story about his DUI arrest. But even that disappeared after a month. Power had protected them for years, now it protected them from nothing. Marcus didn't celebrate their ruin. He barely thought of them at all. One evening, he sat in the foundation office long after everyone else had gone home. The sun had dipped low, throwing long shadows across the rows of filing cabinets. He turned off the lights and walked to the wall where Renee's photo hung, surrounded by the faces of all the others they'd helped find. There were dozens, now young, old, smiling, solemn. Beneath them a small plaque read, for those who were never lost, only forgotten. He stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the city outside. Then he whispered, "We race still looking, sis. Still fighting." Sometimes, when he drove home late, he'd pass the bridge over the Mississippi, where the city lights met the water. He'd roll down the window, let the humid night air rush in, and for a moment he could almost hear Renee laughing beside him, that bright, quick laugh that used to fill their mother's kitchen. He'd smile without meaning to. The H never left, but it stopped hurting the same way. It had turned into something else, something that kept him moving. Justice had come in pieces, not all at once, but it was enough. And for Marcus Carter, that was the kind of victory that didn't need a verdict, only faith, persistence, and the love of a sister who refused to stay forgotten. By the time the calendar turned to 2010, Marcus Carter had gray in his beard and slower steps in his walk. But his eyes still carried that same fire, steady, searching, unwilling to dim. Baton Rouge had changed around him, skyscrapers rising where old warehouses once stood, neon lights reflecting off the Mississippi like restless ghosts. The Renee Carter Foundation had outgrown the little office by the barber shop. They now occupied a renovated 2-story brick building on Perkins Road, with a sign that glowed faintly through the night, "Justice never sleeps." It wasn't flashy, but it felt right, quiet, constant, there when people needed it most. He still came in every morning before the sun, always the first one through the door, always carrying a paper cup of coffee and a worn leather briefcase. Some of the younger staff called him Mr. Carter, others simply Marcus. They treated him with a reverence that made him uncomfortable. He'd tell them, "I'm just a man who got tired of waiting," but they didn't see it that way. To them, he was proof that one voice could move mountains. That persistence could crack the walls of indifference. Gloria still worked alongside him, though her hair had turned silver at the edges. She refused to slow down. "I'll rest when they stop disappearing," she liked to say, half smiling. The two of them shared a rhythm built from years of long nights and courtroom fights. They didn't have to speak much to understand each other. One look was enough. When she laughed, it was softer now, worn by time but still alive. "You ever think about retiring?" she asked one morning over coffee. "Retiring from what?" Marcus said, smirking the truth. Their work had spread far beyond Louisiana. The Foundation's investigations reached into neighboring states, shining light on forgotten names in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. They partnered with universities, training students in investigative research. They even pressured state legislators to pass the Carter Act, a law requiring law enforcement agencies to prioritize missing persons cases regardless of race or background. When the bill passed, Marcus attended the signing ceremony but stayed in the back row. Cameras flashed. Reporters called his name, but he didn't step forward. "This ain't about me," he told Gloria later. "It's about all the ones who never got this far." Even with the successes, Marcus felt the years pressing on him. His hands ached from old mechanic work. His knees popped when he climbed stairs. Some nights, he'd fall asleep at his desk, surrounded by case files, the faint hum of the air conditioner keeping time with his dreams. In those dreams, he saw Renee not as she was when they found her, but alive, laughing, sitting in the passenger seat of his old Ford. Sometimes she'd turn to him and say, "You did, big brother," before the dream slipped away like fog. In the spring of 2011, the Foundation took on a case that hit Marcus harder than most. A young woman named Keisha Moore had vanished from Shreveport after a night shift at a diner. Another working-class black woman whose disappearance the police brushed off. "Probably just left town," the sheriff had said. But when Marcus met Keisha's mother, a quiet woman with trembling hands, he saw something familiar in her eyes. It was the same hollow determination he'd carried for years. He promised her he'd find out what happened. It took months, but they did. The girl had been killed by a coworker, her body buried behind an abandoned gas station. The police called it closure. Marcus called it failure because closure never brings the dead back. That night, after they told the mother the truth, Marcus sat outside the Foundation building long after everyone had gone home. The air smelled like rain, and the streetlights flickered against the wet pavement. He thought about Renee, about Keisha, about all the faces pinned to the walls inside. He realized something then: the work wasn't about justice anymore, not in the way the world defined it. It was about remembrance. Keeping the names alive so they couldn't be erased. He whispered them to himself sometimes, like a prayer. The media still reached out occasionally, wanting interviews, updates, quotes. He turned most of them down. He didn't like being turned into a symbol. Symbols get celebrated once and forgotten twice, he told Gloria. "I'd rather just keep doing the work," she nodded. "That's why people still believe in you." But time had its way of stealing things slowly. Gloria was the first to step back. A mild heart attack in 2013 forced her to cut her hours, though she never fully left. She'd drop by once a week, her cane tapping softly against the tiled floor, and ask Marcus if he'd finally learned to take a day off. "Still no," he'd reply, grinning. "Didn't think so," she'd say. Their friendship had weathered decades, victories, losses, and the slow erosion of the world's attention span. When she finally retired completely a few years later, Marcus gave her a framed photo of their first office. On the back he wrote, "We didn't change the world. We made it listen." By 2015, the Foundation marked its 20th anniversary. They held a small ceremony in the City Hall courtyard. Speeches, music, faces of families they'd helped projected on a white sheet in the evening air. Marcus stood off to the side as people clapped, his heart full but heavy. When it was his turn to speak, he walked slowly to the microphone. "People think justice is about winning," he said. "But justice is really about remembering. Every name, every story, every person who should still be here. That's what keeps us human. My sister taught me that. Renee taught me that. So tonight, if you remember one thing, remember her name. The crowd repeated it softly, a low chorus that rose with the sound of the crickets. Renee Carter. When the event ended, Marcus stayed behind as everyone drifted away. The candles flickered in the soft wind, hundreds of tiny lights glowing against the dark. He stood there, hands in his pockets, feeling the warmth of them on his face. The world had finally remembered her. That was enough. As the years went on, Marcus visited the cemetery less often, not because he loved her less, but because he no longer needed the grave to feel close to her. She was everywhere, in the laughter of the volunteers, in the pages of every case file, in the sound of her favorite gospel song echoing from an old radio. Her absence had become a kind of presence. One quiet morning in 2018, he sat alone in his office watching the city wake up through the window. The light came slow and golden, washing over the framed photos that covered his walls. He took a deep breath and smiled. He thought about how far they'd come from a dusty storage unit on Riverbend Road to a place that gave lost souls their names back. He whispered softly, "We did good, sis." The phone rang, pulling him from the memory. Another case, another family, another story waiting to be told. He picked up, his voice calm, grounded. "Renee Carter Foundation, this is Marcus." And just like that, the work began again. By the time Marcus Carter turned 70, his hands had grown slower, but his voice had not. The world had changed again, cell phones everywhere, news scrolling faster than truth could catch it. Yet inside the brick building on Perkins Road, time seemed to move differently. The air still carried the smell of paper, coffee, and quiet determination. Files lined the shelves like old ghosts, each one a story waiting to be remembered. The Renee Carter Foundation now had branches across the South, New Orleans, Jackson, Birmingham, each one built from the same promise whispered on a rainy night long ago. "We don't stop until they are found." Marcus came to the office every day, though he no longer worked the cases himself. He mostly reviewed, and offered advice to the younger staff. They called him Mazar. See, a name he pretended not to like but secretly cherished. He'd sit by the window with his coffee, watching them move through the hall's fresh faces, bright voices, full of fight. It gave him a quiet kind of peace to know the work would live on after him. One afternoon he found himself alone in the office. The rain was falling steady outside, tapping against the windows like soft applause. He wandered through the halls, stopping at the wall of photographs, all the faces they'd brought home over the years. Some smiling, some solemn, all remembered. He traced his fingers across the frame that held Renee's picture, the same one from her nursing graduation. Her smile hadn't changed even though the world had. "Still with me," he murmured. The doctor had told him weeks earlier that his heart wasn't as strong as it once was. "You need rest," the doctor had said, but Marcus only smiled. Rest is for people who finished what they started. Still, he'd begun to feel it, the heaviness in his chest, the way the stairs grew longer every year. He didn't tell Gloria. She was retired now, living out in Lafayette near her daughter, still sharp as ever but slower, too. They talked every Sunday, always ending the call the same way. "You take care of yourself, Marcus." "I will, Gloria. You too." Neither ever really believed the other. That spring, the foundation planned a memorial 30 years since the day he'd found Renee. They wanted to honor the anniversary quietly, without cameras or speeches, just a gathering of family, friends, and the people whose lives had been touched by her story. When Marcus arrived that evening, the courtyard glowed with candles. Photos hung from twine between the trees, fluttering in the warm breeze. Someone was playing soft blues guitar in the background. It felt less like grief and more like gratitude. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus walked to the microphone slowly. The crowd fell silent, waiting. He looked out at them, faces young and old, black and white, families holding hands. People who might never have met if not for one tragedy that refused to stay buried. He cleared his throat. 30 years, he began. "I used to think that time healed things. But I learned it doesn't. It just teaches you how to carry the hurt better." He paused, smiling faintly. "My sister's been gone a long time now, but she never really left. She's in this work, in every case we take, every name we speak out loud. The world might forget people like her, but we don't let it. That's our promise. His voice softened. You know, I used to pray for justice. Thought it meant punishment. But justice is memory. Justice is love that refuses to disappear. When he stepped away, the crowd stood in quiet applause. He felt something loosen inside him, the final weight he'd been carrying all these years. Gloria came up after, hugging him tight. You always were the preacher between us, she said, smiling through tears. He laughed. Guess I learned from the best lawyer in Louisiana. That night, back home, he couldn't sleep. The air was heavy and still, and the sound of rain drifted against the roof. He sat at the kitchen table, letters spread before him, notes from families, thank yous, and one unopened envelope addressed in familiar handwriting. Gloria's. Inside was a short letter. Marcus, you built something wholly out of heartbreak. That's more than most people ever do. When it's your time to rest, know that the work will keep going. We'll keep saying her name. I promise. He folded the letter gently and placed it in his coat pocket. Later, he drove to the cemetery, the same winding road he'd traveled so many times before. The headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the old iron gate. He parked by the fence and walked the rest of the way, his steps slow but steady. The grass was cool underfoot, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. He knelt before the headstone, brushing away a few fallen petals. Hey baby girl, he said softly. 30 years, hard to believe, he smiled, eyes glistening. You know, they still come by the office. New kids full of ideas. I try not to get in their way. But I tell them about you, about how you never stopped caring for people. How you had that light in you, the kind that doesn't fade. He stayed there for a long while, listening to the rain fade into quiet. When he finally stood, the moon broke through the clouds, silver light washing over the cemetery. He looked up and whispered, I found you. And because of you, we found so many more. Then he turned toward the car, his body tired but his heart light. That night, Marcus Carter passed away in his sleep peacefully, without struggle, as though he'd simply followed a familiar voice calling him home. When the staff found him the next morning, the office lights were still on, a gospel record spinning softly on the turntable. On his desk lay a single sunflower and the letter from Gloria. The city mourned him like one of its own saints. Newspapers ran his photo beside Renee's, their faces side by side, the brother and sister who changed the way the South remembered its lost. The foundation held a candlelight vigil on the steps of the courthouse. Hundreds of people gathered under the night sky. Gloria, frail but standing tall, spoke for him one last time. Marcus taught us that love can be louder than fear, she said. That one man's faith can outlive injustice. He didn't just find his sister. He found a way to make the world listen. In the years that followed, his name became part of the city's story, a mural on a brick wall downtown, painted with the words "Justice never sleeps." The foundation continued its work, each new generation carrying forward the torch he'd lit. And sometimes, late at night, when the office was empty and the rain returned, the staff swore they could hear the faint sound of a man's voice humming through the hall, low, steady, and full of grace. Down by the river, not far from where the old storage unit once stood, a small plaque gleamed beneath the streetlight, in memory of Renee and Marcus Carter, a brother's promise kept. The water flowed beneath it, quiet and endless, carrying their story farther than either of them could have imagined. The story of Marcus and Renee Carter isn't just about a murder, or even about justice won in a courtroom. It's about the long road between silence and truth, and the cost of carrying both. It reminds us that justice, in this country, and in this time, has never been given freely, especially to people whose lives don't fit neatly into the stories the world likes to tell. Marcus's fight was never glamorous. It was slow, exhausting, and full of moments when the world told him to stop asking questions. Yet he kept going, not because he believed the system would suddenly change, but because love gave him no other choice. That's the first lesson this story leaves behind. When love is real, it doesn't vanish with the person we lose. It transforms. It becomes the quiet, stubborn kind, the kind that doesn't need permission to keep existing. For 8 years, Marcus lived in the shadows of a question that no one wanted to answer. His search for Renee turned into a mirror for something larger: how America treats the missing, especially when they read black, poor, or female. The world moves on quickly from those faces. Headlines fade, cases go cold. The machinery of attention shifts towards someone wealthier, lighter skinned, easier to care about. Marcus's refusal to let that happen wasn't just an act of brotherly devotion. It was a rebellion against erasure itself. He showed what it means to hold the line when everyone else has let go. That kind of courage doesn't roar, it endures. The second lesson is quieter but just as fierce. Justice isn't a moment, it's maintenance. The verdict against the Whitmores, the foundation that followed, even the laws that changed afterward, none of those erased the loss. Justice didn't resurrect Renee or heal the years Marcus spent alone. What it did was restore dignity. It turned tragedy into testimony, grief into movement. In that transformation lies the real meaning of justice, not punishment, but remembrance. When the world chooses to remember the forgotten, it becomes a little less cruel. There's also a lesson about power woven through every thread of their story. The Whitmores were men of status, money, and an influence, the kind of people who believed their connections could rewrite truth. And for a long time, they were right. Their wealth shielded them from suspicion. Their race protected them from scrutiny. And their silence was louder than in any confession. Yet even power has limits when faced with persistence. Marcus's fight exposed the cracks in the facade, how corruption hides behind respectability, how evil often dresses in expensive suits and polite smiles. It teaches us that injustice doesn't always look like monsters in the dark. Sometimes looks like men shaking hands under fluorescent lights. But perhaps the most profound lesson comes from what Marcus built out of pain. The Renee Carter Foundation wasn't born from victory. It was born from heartbreak that refused to die quietly. He took the worst thing that ever happened to him and turned it into a light for others. That's something rare, to let grief become a kind of generosity. He didn't want revenge. He wanted meaning. He wanted other families to know they weren't crazy, that their pain mattered, that their loved ones' names deserved to be spoken out loud. In a world addicted to forgetting, he became a man devoted to memory. The story also speaks to the broader American struggle with race and visibility. For generations, black families have searched for missing daughters, sons, sisters, and brothers with little help from the systems designed to protect them. Their pain is often dismissed, their loved ones quietly categorized as runaways or troubled. Marcus's fight forced people to confront the quiet hierarchy of whose lives are considered valuable. It asks an uncomfortable question that still echoes today: who gets to be found? There's beauty in the way this story ends, though it's not a happy ending in the traditional sense. Marcus doesn't die a hero surrounded by applause. He dies quietly, fulfilled, in the same city that once doubted him. His death isn't a tragedy, it's a release. By the time he leaves this world, he's already done the impossible. He's made the world remember a name that once lived only on missing posters. He's proved that ordinary people can build extraordinary legacies from the ruins of loss. And that's another lesson, that greatness isn't about being known. It's about leaving something behind that helps someone else live with a little more dignity, a little more light. For readers and for anyone listening to the echo of this story, Marcus's life reminds us that closure is a myth. There's no such thing as moving on from certain wounds. We just learn to move forward while carrying them differently. Healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering without breaking every time. It's learning that the dead don't truly leave us, they become part of what we do next. In every case Marcus took, in every mother he comforted, Renee was there. Not as a ghost, but as a purpose. The foundation, still standing long after his passing, carries that purpose forward. The people who walk those halls now, the young investigators, the volunteers, the families, they were part of a chain built from love, anger, and resilience. Their existence is proof that one life, even one lost life, can change a city's conscience. That's the final lesson the Carters leave behind. A history isn't shaped by the powerful, and it's shaped by those who refuse to disappear quietly. And maybe that's what this story wants to leave with us most of all, the reminder that justice doesn't end with verdicts or laws. It lives in how we treat the forgotten. It lives in the names we refuse to let fade. It lives in every act of remembrance, no matter how small. Marcus Carter didn't start out to change the world. He just wanted to find his sister. But in doing so, he showed us that love, even broken, even tired, even alone, is still the strongest force we have against darkness. If there's a single image that captures the lesson of this story, it's the river that runs through Baton Rouge, wide, steady, and endless. It carries everything: the memories, the pain, the names, the history. Marcus and Renee's story flows there now, too, part of that eternal current. The river doesn't stop for anyone, but it remembers the ones who learned to listen to its song, the ones who understood that the fight for justice isn't about changing the current, but about refusing to drown in it. If you enjoy stories that make you think twice before turning off the lights, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are still many things left unsaid, and we'll continue exploring them together.